Pastor Don. Well, I saw this morning on the internet where the Kentucky Department of Corrections gave an award to two legislators, Senator Tom Jensen from London and Representative John Tilley from Hopkinsville, for their great work, they say, in passing this most recent, what I call get out of jail legislation. They claim that they're going to, over the next 10 years, they're going to save $422 million. Well, by not putting people in prison, I worry that the people that are going to end up paying more than that are going to be the new innocent victims of crime. And I started thinking a little bit about how the next thing that's going to happen, I'll bet you the prisoners sooner or later that are released from prison will probably form a union. Then they'll vote, and Tom Jensen and John Tilley will be voted the prisoners' men of the year. I don't know, but I thought...
Well, only if the prisoners can vote an extension, because they'll be out of prison. Can they still vote if they're in prison for them?
Well, they can't. If they're convicted of a felony, typically they can't vote. And even if they could vote, most of them don't vote.
But hasn't there been legislation introduced in some states that will allow people with felony records to vote? Isn't that a trend that we're seeing, like in Hawaii? I think they made that change in California.
Well, sure. I mean, it happened. Jesse Crenshaw, local state representative, makes that proposal every year, and it requires a constitutional amendment. In Maine, people that are in prison can vote. Think about it. They've got a voting booth in prison. Now that's America in action.
Well, and that's a significant voting block for those individuals too, because the people.
Well, a cell block, is that what you mean?
Well, no. What I mean is those people are going to vote. If you set it up so people in prison can vote, they don't have a whole lot better. They're going to vote. So you can see where the legislature might want that to be passed to get that.
Yeah, and they can go and campaign because they want the felony offender vote. That's a block.
We're sort of laughing about this, but honestly,
it's not funny.
It's not funny, and it is true. And there are people that think that way. There are politicians who actually think that way, and it very well could happen.
Well, let me tell you something that. But after I read that, I had written something about how have we gotten where we are in the last 5 or 6 years, and this whole business about anti-punishment, anti-incarceration philosophy taken over. And let me tell you what I found. I've written a little article about this, and here I'm going to read it to you, and you interrupt me as you come along, as we go along. It's captioned, "A report from academia. Professor says reduce prison population because it will warn the public that there are limits as to how far the state will go to protect us from crime."
Warn the public?
Yeah. That there are limits about how far the state will go to protect us from crime. Now, he wrote that. This is Professor Robert Lawson from the law school, from his article, "Difficult Times in Kentucky Corrections After Shocks of a Tough on Crime Philosophy." Well, his articles along those lines are, I think, the basis of what the legislature has done. They seem to have swallowed that philosophy, anti-incarceration philosophy, hook, line, and sinker, and was the catalyst, in my opinion, in 2007 to begin this rush to release people from prison. And then, of course, last year they passed this House Bill 463 that is basically a catch and release crime fighting strategy. And his philosophy of there are limits beyond which the state should not and will not go in its effort to protect the public against the commission of crime. That's troubling on a number of levels. First, it reveals that the state does not and should not have as a priority to do everything it can to provide for the safety of the public. Now, my experience is that citizens, at least in Fayette County, believe that their safety ranks at the top of their expectations of government. Protection of crime and criminals is one of the primary reasons that we all pay taxes. Second reason this troubles me is that catch and release or no incarceration philosophy just ignores the real world. It appears to simply be the work of an academic who lives in a cocoon of safety free from the daily fear of crime. To say that someone else's safety or protection from crime should be limited is clearly an elitist and arrogant view of crime and its impact on our community. My guess is that those academics, legislators, governors, and other decision makers who support such a limitation on someone else's right to be protected from crime do not have to deal with the constant fear of crime and victimization. That fear is foreign to them, so it's easy for them to say somebody else's safety is not and shouldn't be a priority. It appears to be the modern day elitist version of the let them eat cake attitude. It's an unfortunate reality that when criminals are released from jail or prison, they most often return to the neighborhood from whence they came. In our case, most of those neighborhoods are what we call high crime neighborhoods, where most of the crime in Lexington occurs. Unfortunately, the residents of those high crime neighborhoods find themselves to be lower socioeconomic types and predominantly minority. And these people that live in high crime neighborhoods have every right to feel that their safety is just as important and worthy of protection as some professor or all of these well-to-do folks in town who don't live in high crime neighborhoods. They have every right to expect law enforcement to do what it can to protect them. And any philosophy or law which limits law enforcement or incarceration's attempt to protect the public will always hurt the residents of the high crime neighborhoods the most, because that's where most of the crime occurs. The idea that our state government should not have as its primary purpose the protection of the public from the commission of crime is not what I believe people are paying their taxes for. So I think that's kind of where this whole thing began in 2005 when he wrote that letting people out of prison will warn the public that there are limits how far the state will go to protect us from crime. That's what I think is the genesis of all of this crime-fighting strategy that are the new laws. Now, the public's going to get fed up because crime rate's it's going up.
Well, you've been warning us for some time about this slide into the 60s mentality, as you call it, where you experienced this. I mean, you lived in an era when they were letting people...
Now, that was 8-track tapes, right?
Tune in to the following stations every Sunday to hear In Touch with Ray the DA and Officer Don. We hope you enjoyed the show. Stay tuned in for next week's episode.